The year 2020 for the fighting game community is ironically a year that saw factors that led both to forward progress with regards to game theory, as well as an impediment to the competitive landscape. There is often a theme in the FGC within any given year, be it the feeling of the guard changing in 2017 or the presence of esports in 2019. However, while only being halfway through the year 2020, it is already comprised of multiple major themes that have to be taken note of. It could be argued that the three most prominent fighting games in the FGC today are Tekken 7, Street Fighter V, and Dragon Ball FighterZ. The quote-unquote big three are all faced with interesting paths ahead, some that are led with optimism, and some that are followed with a slight concern. Dragon Ball FighterZ is the youngest of the big three, and it possibly also has the brightest future as well. 2 years into the game's lifespan, and it is without a doubt still a prominent force in the FGC. The game features iconic characters from the Dragon Ball universe, and implements a slightly more modernized version of a versus title similar to Marvel vs. Capcom, though it is also quite unique with its heavy influence of trademark Arc System Works mechanics and speed. Dragon Ball FighterZ has gone through the waves of adjustments that had to do with the homogeneous gameplay, match length, and some criticism of its universal mechanics such as Super Dash. Though with time and maturation, the game managed to stabilize some of its inconsistencies using both player data and community input. Currently, the most vocalized criticism of the game is its lacking variety in its roster. As of May 2020, Dragon Ball FighterZ has multiple duplicate characters. Some to note are the 6 different forms of Goku and 3 different forms of Vegeta. Despite the various duplicate characters being equipped with dissimilar fighting styles, the want for roster diversity has been echoed by the community. It is important to note that albeit not perfect with its design, Dragon Ball FighterZ is the first iteration of a true fighting game community staple incorporating the iconic property. Its development has had some criticism. However, considering it is still a relatively new franchise, and its management on both the publishing and development wings is handled by 2 established companies within the FGC, the future of Dragon Ball FighterZ should be met with optimism, be it by the continued support and polish to the current title, or improvements which will be made to the possible sequel. Street Fighter V is not technically the oldest title among the big three. However, it certainly feels like it. The game is currently on its 2nd expansion and 5th season, and at this time, it is unknown if the Champion Edition iteration of the game was planned for a long-term or short stint. To put it frankly, Street Fighter V is and has been quite a polarizing fighting game title in the community, practically since its initial release. The direction of the game was not what many were expecting post the Street Fighter IV era, and Capcom's development woes since are all well documented. However, after making a much needed improvement with the 2nd iteration of the game, Street Fighter V Arcade Edition, the game finally had stabilized some, and while it was not reformed to a degree where it took the FGC by storm, the product in hand was without a doubt a comprehensive package. The momentum of Street Fighter V Arcade Edition continued through its journey to Capcom Cup 2019, and eventually into the announcement of Street Fighter V Champion Edition. Some of the significant improvements to note included more gameplay options, and of course additional characters. Soon after the release of Champion Edition, Capcom made improvements to the online stability of the game, though not without controversy, as it had first removed a community-made patch which stabilized much of the online experience, only to take fixing matters in their own hands roughly a month later. Approaching the 5-year mark since its introduction to the FGC, Street Fighter V and Capcom have continued going through the same path of taking 1 step forward, yet 2 steps back. While they must be commended for continuing to rebound and adjust to the criticism received, they must also be held accountable for the continuous questionable decisions they have made on the development side. It is unclear what the next step for Capcom and Street Fighter is, especially considering their momentum has been halted with the postponement of one of the major professional circuits in the FGC, Capcom Pro Tour. All things considered, the idea of Street Fighter V Champion Edition extending its lifespan for another few years would not be a bad one, as it could be argued that the game has reached its utmost potential with its current version. The eventual transition to the presumed Street Fighter VI could signify an enormous step forward for the FGC, especially after coming off a successful tail end to Street Fighter V, something Champion Edition is quite capable of doing. Tekken 7 is possibly the most popular fighting game among the big three. However, it is also the oldest among them as well. While it has only been in the hands of consumers for just under 3 years, the game has been in sight since 2015. By spending over 2 years in open development, the game managed to ensure a successful launch, and consequently, also set a precedent of building and troubleshooting the game with the help of its direct community. Throughout the last 3 years, Tekken 7's development team has been one of the leading examples of responding to both player and spectator feedback. But the criticism of Tekken 7 as of late has not been whether the gameplay issues will get fixed or not, but the frequency in which they have been occurring. The introductions of the game's third season also introduced multiple gameplay issues and inconsistencies that have been uncharacteristic considering the game's track record. In a similar vein to Street Fighter V's early criticism, Tekken 7's Season 3 changes made the game quite difficult to play at different speeds. The increase in factors such as overall damage and wall carry has pushed the pace of play to a much higher gear than the previous seasons. In the last 6 months alone, Tekken 7 had to deal with Leroy Smith's absurd dominance post-release, the questionable properties of moves like Hell Sweep, and is currently dealing with hurtbox inconsistencies with the newest addition to the roster, Fakumram. Though, in fairness, the inability to test both the changes made in Season 3, as well as the new additions to the roster, due to the postponement of the Tekken World Tour, is a major factor in both the delayed response by Bandai Namco to correct certain issues, as well as the overreaction made by much of the community. Despite Tekken 7 being an aging title, it is still one of the most popular ones in the landscape currently, truly speaking to its excellence, recent faults notwithstanding. But with even that said, there are 2 questions the game is faced with as we move forward. What style of Tekken does the community want in the future? Is the original version of Tekken 7 Fatal Retribution the mold to model the next game in the franchise? Or is perhaps the faster pace of play introduced in both Season 2 and Season 3 more appealing? The other major question is, what should the structure be of the next game in the franchise? There have been many clamoring for another individual Tekken game, presumably to be Tekken 8. There are also those who are interested in another tag match game, which would be presumed to be Tekken Tag Tournament 3, and lastly, there is some speculation of the resurfacing of a previously planned Versus title, Tekken Cross Street Fighter. It is important Bandai Namco and the Tekken team finds answers to these questions before moving on from Tekken 7, so they can ensure another great Tekken experience for years to come. It is without a doubt that the big three are extremely impacted by the postponement of their professional circuits, especially with 2 aging titles in Street Fighter V and Tekken 7 and one looking to maintain its momentum in Dragon Ball FighterZ. Upon the return to a normal competitive schedule, it will be interesting to see what kind of narratives are in store for the big three, and if any changes are made to their future plans. After an unexpected turn of events, the FGC along with the rest of the world had to adjust to the times by dealing with a global pandemic. The indefinite postponement of professional circuits, to go along with the inability to gather in large groups and having to socially distance from one another, has forced the FGC to look at ways of continuing on remotely. The emphasized change of prioritizing remote ways of competing led the FGC to reevaluate which games are qualified to do so and which are not. As a result, a theme in the fighting game landscape, which picked up momentum even prior to the global pandemic, resurfaced even greater, that being the need for reliable netcode in fighting games. There has been an apprehensiveness to move away from the traditional model of delay-based netcode used in most fighting games for multiple reasons. The first being the fact that the online connectivity in regions like Japan, where most of the signature fighting game titles hail from, and South Korea, where the esports movement is quite prevalent, is not as big of an issue compared to regions like the United States, parts of Europe, etc. Outside of avoiding the cost by having to restructure the online component of many legacy titles, the experience with Street Fighter V and its own version of rollback netcode may have been a deterrent for many Japanese game developers, especially after witnessing the displeasure of many Street Fighter players for years. A similar thing happened during the early days of Mortal Kombat X and NetherRealm Studios' own version of rollback netcode. However, as of October of 2019, Tony Cannon, developer of GGPO, announced that the proven rollback netcode was now open source and available under the MIT license. The importance of reliable netcode in the FGC became no more apparent when the announcement of the transition of EVO 2020 to EVO Online came in mid-May, as well as the declaration of the 4 games that will make up the open online tournaments, all which use a form of rollback networking and 2 which use GGPO.
You are also a cyborg. No, just cybernetically enhanced. You will be terminated.
Mortal Kombat 11 Aftermath may have the most momentum out of any fighting game in the landscape at this particular time. The game just recently released its story expansion, along with new characters, as well as receiving proper recognition with the recent addition to EVO Online, which is quite noteworthy considering it was originally excluded from EVO 2020. Mortal Kombat 11 has done a lot right in the relative short time since its release. It has included some of the more iconic guest characters in pop culture to its roster, it has managed to integrate a story mode perhaps superior to any other fighting game on the market, and it has continued to innovate on the aspects that make Mortal Kombat such a fan favorite. It is also important to note that Mortal Kombat 11 is one of the only games to actually complete its professional season after a long world tour, officially ending with Sonic Fox defeating Ninja Killa in an excellent grand final set at Final Kombat 2020 in early March of this year. It has been mentioned before, however, despite being able to consistently win over a large portion of the mainstream gaming community, NetherRealm Studio titles including both the Mortal Kombat and Injustice series respectively seem to find themselves in a unique position of being in a separate yet powerful circle in the FGC. The games haven't shown as much pull of garnering interest from other communities within the FGC to cross-pollinate, especially in comparison to titles like Tekken 7 and Dragon Ball FighterZ. But in fairness, staying true to the nature of the mechanics and presentation of the games have much to do with why they are consistently at the top of the charts in the years in which they are released. If not for the relative short lifespan NRS games have seemed to model their development cycle around, and the barrier between the hardcore community and the casual fandom of the game, Mortal Kombat 11 would most definitely earn a spot as a fourth game to join the big three. Though it could also be said that with regards to momentum, Mortal Kombat 11 holds more of it than all of the big three combined. Officially the oldest game on this list, Skullgirls' second Encore may be its most deserving. After coming up short of making an appearance at EVO 2013, Skullgirls has always been a bridesmaid, never a bride, but that all changed, albeit 7 years later, as Skullgirls' second Encore got the nod as one of the 4 games added to EVO Online's open tournament. The game oddly has been one of the best kept secrets in the FGC, as it holds one of the best tutorials in fighting games, an excellent online experience which continues getting improved upon, and is arguably the most visually and audibly stylish fighting game to come out in the last decade. Match pacing in Skullgirls can be quite chaotic considering its versus tag style mechanics. However, with excellent character scaling and battle options, as well as readily available resources offered by the game's comprehensive package, the road to better adjusting to both playing and spectating the game is made much easier. Skullgirls' second Encore may have gotten its flowers later than anticipated, but 2020 may be the year it is appreciated the most, considering it will attract much of the competitive focus with the upcoming kickoff of EVO Online, and as the old saying goes, it is better late than never. Killer Instinct enjoyed a 3-year stint on the main stage, the last being its appearance at EVO 2016. And while the game has continued in smaller circles since, the game's quality has spoken for itself repeatedly throughout the years with its mechanic versatility alone. Known for being equipped with excellent offline modes which aid newcomers to understand the game's offensive and defensive options, but also as being a leader with regards to its online infrastructure, thanks to its use of rollback netcode. The inclusion of Killer Instinct at EVO Online is a nice resurrection for a game which has had its time in the limelight, yet never really felt to truly capture the wider circles in the FGC, predominantly to it existing exclusively on one publisher's platform, only adding Steam as an additional home for the game at the tail end of 2017 to go along with Xbox One and Windows 10. As a mature game, Killer Instinct is expected to showcase its player talent during the upcoming open tournament, which could perfectly time momentum towards a new console generation and perhaps reignite the possibility for another iteration in the franchise. Owning one of the most compelling narratives for a fighting game in recent years, Them's Fighting Herds is a spiritual successor to the originally planned fighting game, Fighting is Magic. However, after a cease and desist letter received from the My Little Pony intellectual property owner, the project restarted, and fast-forwarding nearly a decade later, with both the character design help from one of the original My Little Pony animators and a successful crowdfunding campaign, the official launch of the game was made a reality in late April of 2020. Now, despite the game being less than a month old, it has already garnered much attention in the FGC. Reasons have having to do with its unique take on fighting game characters, its use of GGPO, and lastly, but perhaps most glaring reason, its inclusion to EVO Online. Them's Fighting Herds is a charming indie fighting game that may have found itself in the right place at the right time. With the FGC's focus on online experience and the move to a remote competitive structure for the time being, the game's fighting future may be in good hands. The response to netcode reliability by the largest fighting game tournament in the world, Evolution, could very well be the catalyst for the future of fighting games with regards to making a change to every game on the landscape, regardless of development origin. The timing will be there, however, capitalizing on the moment will be up to the FGC. If not for the global pandemic, professional world tours would spotlight many other games the FGC has to offer in 2020, and so while they may not currently have a stage, there are many games in the landscape that certainly still have a presence. Its inclusion to Arc World Tour would have been another step forward concerning its momentum, if not for its cancellation in entirety due to COVID-19. Nevertheless, the game has been praised for its character design and unique version of its story campaign. With continued developer support, which has included balance adjustments and a steady release schedule of additional characters, the game has managed to grab the interest of both the Arc System Works veterans and newcomers alike. The game employs some unique mechanics such as skybound arts, as well as a guard button to make the game more accessible to newcomers. However, it still holds character matchup depth for more experienced players. Some early criticism of the game has been with its roster balance and slow match pacing. However, considering Granblue Fantasy Versus is only a few months old, there is plenty of time to improve the game's overall quality. BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle's future is in quite an interesting position. The game has continued to receive developer support, exemplified by the roster and Fate expansion that saw characters from Akatsuki Blitzkampf, Arcana Heart, and even Senran Gakura join the fold. The game was also the other title alongside Granblue Fantasy Versus to be spotlighted at Arc World Tour prior to its cancellation. However, the game's dedicated player pool has vastly lessened in numbers as of recent months, and overall interest in the game has not seen much growth, arguably for two reasons. The first is the mere fact that there are simply more options on the fighting game market, naturally taking away some of the game's players and spreading it across newer titles. The other reason is the one criticism BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle has had since its initial release. Despite the innovative and well-made use of the tag battle mechanics, the game had sacrificed singular character depth for duo synchronization. The additional fates added and balance changes made for the game's second season failed to address its biggest fault. Therefore, by that same process, it not only failed to attract more players, it even failed to retain many of which make up its concurrent player base. It is unknown what the future has in store for BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle. A possible third season is not out of the question. However, if there is a game that has been hurt most by its competitive season ending prematurely, it could very well be BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle. Soulcalibur VI has to be the recipient of the Worst Timing Award. As months before the global pandemic forced tournaments to shut down, the announcement that Soulcalibur would finally get a professional circuit in the form of the Soulcalibur World Tour 2020 was made in December of 2019. With halted momentum, Soulcalibur VI has continued its run in relatively smaller yet dedicated circles in the FGC, and has seen yet another well-fitted guest character join the fray, this time being Haomaru from the Samurai Shodown franchise. While it's not known for making as much noise in the FGC compared to some other titles, the word on the game, arguably since its initial release, has been nothing but positive. Soulcalibur VI should be commended for its ability to ingratiate newcomers with aspects such as character creation, as well as acknowledge its veterans with both legacy mechanics and modernized ones as well. With plenty to offer with regards to gameplay, spectator appeal, and one of the best examples of incorporating guest characters in any fighting game, Soulcalibur VI seems to just be needing some luck in order to truly fulfill its potential. Along with Granblue Fantasy Versus, Samurai Shodown features something that isn't very prevalent in the FGC, that being the emphasis on slower match pacing and the focus on the neutral aspect of fighting games, but with damage accountability. With some of the most unique mechanics in fighting games, Samurai Shodown truly stands apart from any other fighting game on the market, making it a one-of-a-kind with regards to both a gameplay experience as well as a spectator's one. Despite not prioritizing extended combos or any tag components, the game is quite deep with its bevy of offensive and defensive options available to a player, which consequently may require a longer adjustment period, which is often not extremely receptive to newcomers. Though be it the musical score, gameplay pacing, mechanical priority, and character design, both including the original and extended roster introduced in its season pass, Samurai Shodown distinguishes itself as a more mature, darker themed fighting game. Its few shortcomings have to do with its unstable online experience and absence on the PC marketplace. Its audience may be more specific, however Samurai Shodown should be heralded as one of the few games in 2020 to truly march to the beat of its own drum. Dead or Alive 6's narrative is an unfortunate one, however, not an unpredictable one. The initial reveal of the game had the FGC intrigued in its possible change of direction of emphasizing its priority on gameplay and competition, rather than customization options and glorified physics. Though the optimism did not last long, as the game dealt with much criticism with regards to its DLC practices, and has made a share of questionable PR decisions. The game, however, did complete its professional circuit, crowning Hoodless as the world champion back in November of 2019. From a technical standpoint, Dead or Alive 6 has been praised for its take on 3D mechanics, as the core gameplay allows for creativity both on offense and defense, though the backlash on Koei Tecmo's handling of downloadable content eventually led to the announcement that patch version 1.22 will be the game's last, and that development will officially cease as of late March 2020. The abandonment of Dead or Alive 6 is sad, but expected. Despite offering much from an FGC standpoint, it left much to be desired from a general consumer standpoint, leading to a bad situation turned worse, and eventually sealing the game's fate and ultimately its demise. Under Night and Birth has had an interesting journey for nearly a decade in the FGC, and the game finally seemed to get its deserved moment in 2019. The game's third expansion, Latest, seemingly stole the show at many tournaments, and the game's quality truly spoke for itself, both through competition on stage and experience at home. Moving to February of 2020, and the game has gone through another major update, this time in the form of Under Night and Birth Execution Late CL-R. The update introduced a new character, a favorable UI change, and an overall balance update. While Uniclair is very much similar to Unist, it has not grabbed the FGC with the same amount of interest. Some of the possible reasons, subjective as they may be, have to do with the instability of its online experience and its discrepancy between the zoning-heavy portion of the roster and the rushdown portion of the roster. The game has never shied away from rewarding the ability to hit the opponent from far away. However, with the ability to control momentum with the game's unique grid system, defensive countermeasures were equally rewarded. The changes made to the game, both systematic and character-specific, seemingly widened the gap between the characters just enough to create imbalance between the efficiency of the zoning game plan versus the rushdown game plan. Regardless if it's a better or worse version of Unist, Uniclair at its core still holds many of the properties that made the game so enjoyable, and as it has been demonstrated for years, the game's community is likely going nowhere. Power Rangers Battle for the Grid does a lot right. It applies innovative versus style mechanics, it implements rollback netcode, and it uses a recognizable IP. The game's few downfalls had to do with its lack of content at launch and its underwhelming graphical presentation. However, with the addition of characters and content through its season passes, the game has attracted more interest around the FGC, especially from versus fighting game fans, as the game does take some inspiration from the Marvel vs. Capcom franchise. With momentum pushing towards reliable online experience in the FGC, and the recent announcement of the game's third season pass, to go along with its ubiquitous availability, Power Rangers Battle for the Grid's future may be quite bright. Fight of Animals' concept sells itself. It is comprised of hilarious animal memes as its core roster, and as a game takes itself anything but seriously. This fun little indie title features rollback netcode, as well as accessible gameplay mechanics for more of a beginner target audience. The game's presentation, while minimalistic, is charming and complements the overall aesthetic of the characters. While it may not be announcing any world tours anytime soon, the FGC always has room for lighthearted and fun-themed fighting games, and Fight of Animals certainly is that. After spending quite some time in the early access space, Fantasy Strike's full release very much delivered on what was promised. The game features unique fighting game mechanics which emphasize the importance of reflex and reaction, and removes the need for long and complex combos by introducing dedicated action buttons. Fantasy Strike consists of a modest yet variable cast, which are categorized into 4 different groups, those being Zoner, Rushdown, Grappler, and Wildcard. Although the game may be limited in the search of potential opponents considering its install base, the use of GGPO rollback netcode is definitely a positive in ensuring a stable online experience. With the amount of competition in the landscape, Fantasy Strike may live in smaller pockets in the FGC. However, with a charming artistic character design and newcomer-friendly components, it may serve as a great introduction for those interested in exploring what fighting games have to offer. We're in the middle of the year 2020 and the FGC has already had its fair share of headlines. The FGC's response to the global pandemic saw the cancellation of both small and large tournaments across the globe, the postponement and cancellation of multiple world tours, and lastly, the increased emphasis on a reliable online infrastructure. The questions that arise from the first theme are, when will the FGC be able to compete at offline venues again? Will developers and publishers notice the need for a change with regards to delay-based netcode? And if not, what action does the FGC take so they do? The FGC is also in a position where 2 of its big 3 are aging fighting game titles, and with the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X looming, one would assume fighting games will have to follow the new hardware eventually. The question that arises from the second theme is a simple one of what is in store for the FGC's aging titles. With no official answers yet, I can only offer an opinion. If developers of games that require change do not pursue it, the only course of action the FGC can take is to support the games that do. With the uncertainty of when things will return to norm, a final year as a send-off send-off for the community's aging titles would be nice to see, especially if executed well and builds momentum onto a new game in the respective franchise. In closing, the FGC is faced with many uncertainties as of right now, some questions to be answered sooner and some later. Though one thing is for certain, the fighting game community in 2020 has continued making efforts to move forward when many have remained stagnant. Fighting games are arguably home to the most intriguing narratives in gaming, and the year 2020 is no exception. There is no doubt that the future of the FGC will be comprised of many unique fighting game titles, players, community leaders, and fans alike, each one an essential piece that makes up the completed puzzle we call the fighting game community.